Welcome back to Healthy Home. So today we're going to talk about Southern folk medicine, and I'm going to be giving a honest review of the book Southern Folk Medicine by Phyllis D. Light. So there is a foreword by Rosemary Gladstar, and then there's an afterword by Matthew Wood, two very widely known herbalists and that have been studying for a really long time. And Phyllis D. Light is one of the herbalists that have been studying decades as well. So the back of the book says, this book is the first to describe the history, folklore, assessment, methods, and remedies of Southern and Appalachian folk medicine, the only system of folk medicine other than Native American medicine that developed in the United States. One of the system's last active practitioners, Phyllis D. Light, has studied and worked with herbs, foods, and other healing techniques for more than 30 years. In everyday language, she explains how Southern and Appalachian folk medicine was passed down orally through the generations by herbalists and healers who cared for people in their communities with the natural tools on hand. All right. And then so she just has some reviews of the book by other herbalists as well. So right off the bat, I just realized that it says this is the only system of folk medicine other than Native American that developed in the United States. So I have this book here that I think is a really good companion to this book. And this is African American medicine or African American herbalism. And so basically from what she said, either African American herbalism doesn't exist because she said that this is the only other system other than Native American, or she's saying that Southern folk medicine is one that contains African American herbalism. So immediately that already kind of tells you a little bit about some of the things that we'll be talking about in this review. Okay, so I think this is a really good beginner book. I think that the way that she writes is really captivating. She does use a lot of storytelling, as Rosemary said, and she said that's one of the things that she really enjoyed about her. And so that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book as well. So some comments did say that they thought it was more of stories than less concrete remedies. And I'll say maybe 50-50. In this book, she does talk about some certain conditions or constitutions like wet, damp. And then she also lists herbs that could be beneficial for those. So while she doesn't necessarily give you more like homemade or old school remedies as much, she does tell you, the herbs that were traditionally used. The other things about this book, I really like how in the back they have a quiz for those who want to know about their constitution. And you'll see that they talk about different issues with blood. Let me go to the table of contents. She talks about bitter blood, salty blood, sour blood, sweet blood. She also talks about thick blood and thin blood when I was reading, but that doesn't seem to be an actual chapter. But she did talk about those in other chapters. Another thing that's a little bit different in here is that she talks about Christianity and the Bible and that influence as well. So it is refreshing to actually, read a book that's about herbalism that actually incorporates scripture and shows how, the scriptures really basically back what herbalism is about. So I think that that's really cool too. So that would probably be about all of my pros. But I think that the way that she writes and the way that she explains things, when she talks about the anatomy and everything, it really is, it's like really in depth, but at the surface level. So most people would be able to, I think, follow along with what she's saying and really understand their body better and, what herbs can do better. So I think that that is really good. I think that's a really good effort from her. Now, before I purchased this book, I saw what it's about and I instantly went to the author. And so, as I said, she's been studying for a long time. This is her field of expertise and everything like that. And you can't take away from her, anything, the way she grew up and the traditions that she's carrying on. And I think that it is really good that she is trying to be a vocal voice for this tradition that, is another one that is ignored. However, I do feel like she really ignored important aspects when it comes to the different cultures. It seemed really kind of biased, to be honest, in certain aspects. It really seemed biased towards maybe an European influence, whereas personally, if you look at history, it really seems to be a very strong Native American influence. And I'll get to the chapters. Let's see. So let's see, where is it at? So we have the Native American influence lasts from page 75 to page 80, and it's about 5 full pages when you tally it. And then there's a Trail of Tears, which is about 1.5 pages. So that's 6.5 pages, or maybe it's about, I'll say 7 to 8 pages. But then there's a section also about the Irish and British Isles, and that is 5 pages again. So it's the same amount of pages as the Native American influence when you're not talking about the Trail of Tears. But if you're talking about the African American influence, that only goes from page 82 to 85. And so I did read, let's see. So let's go to the African American influence. Okay. So literally you're here and then you're on to the next chapter. And the thing about this is, I mean, fine if it has really good information, but I felt like it's lacking. And so I'll read a little bit of excerpts of it so you can understand why I came to the conclusion that I did. So first, there's a section in here that talks about music. And it says, in addition to the influence on Southern folk medicine, the coming together of Celtic culture and Africa in the South produced other amazing contributions to American culture. In music, the creation of jazz, bluegrass, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, hip hop, country music, ragtime, boogie woogie, rap, soul, and pop songs. And she says in dance, jazz, tap, buck dance, stick dances, swing, jitterbug, juke, joint dancing, break dance, and hip hop. And let's not forget the banjo. What would bluegrass be without the banjo? So she talks about music. So this is talking about the influence of African Americans. And so she's not even just talking about herbalism. So it's not even, 2 pages or 3 pages of just herbalism as an influence. We're talking about music here. And then, as you see, she says the coming together of Celtic culture and Africa in the South. So she even puts another culture and says that, that those two together is what made hip hop and rhythm and blues and all that, and breakdance and hip hop. I don't think so. It would definitely be the other way around if it was even shared, and it's not. And so just from seeing Southern folk medicine, just like with soul food, we know where the influence is, or where most of the influence is, but it's still not talked about and it's not given its due credit. And so I don't feel she gave African American influence due credit either. Another instance that I want to talk about is where she talked about Africa contributed several foods that are now considered staples. The most common: okra, rice, black-eyed peas, sorghum, watermelons, and yams. And she said these foods were brought aboard the ships to feed the Africans on the long voyage, and food that was left over and seeds that were saved were planted by the slaves upon arrival in the South. She said foods common in Southern cooking, such as pinto, kidney, red, navy, black, great northern beans, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and hominy are actually New World foods. So again, whenever she kind of gives a little bit of credit, it's like she kind of feels the need to take it back for some reason. And then the other instance that would basically sum up to, if you got this book and you were really expecting some great concrete history that you don't already know about, African Americans, it's really lacking. And if you're looking for African American herbalism to be mentioned in here, it's very lacking. And it can be surmised in about 1 to 2 sentences. She says, I've searched for documentation of medicinal plants brought from Africa with the slaves, and there just doesn't seem to be any. There is documentation that some Africans braided licorice seeds in their hair, but one conjecture was that the licorice seeds made the hair smell sweet and was attractive to the opposite sex. As far as my research has uncovered, the Africans who were taken or sold as slaves could not bring their medicine, their plants, or their healers with them. What they could bring were their healing framework of how to use herbs, rituals, customs, and their music and dances. So we go from that, and if she says that nothing was brought with them and all they could do was, bring the way that they had their own framework and use of herbs, herbalism, whatever, then you would think in the next sentence or so they would go to elaborate about African American herbalism and what that impact was, but you don't see that either. So she talks about it also meant taking aspects from other cultural groups. She says Native American, Scottish, Irish, Spanish, French, German, and English, and making something unique. So she didn't really give any new. I've studied genealogy. Actually, my oldest video on this channel was actually me doing DNA tests and things like that. And I was really interested in studying history. And I did actually write a book back when. That's still out there, but I don't advertise it or talk about it or whatever. And I talk about history in there as well. And actually, I have a African history curriculum that I still actually have to this day. So I have the history already down pat. I don't feel like, learned that much from this book. So if you were looking to really get a full sense of what Southern folk medicine is, and I just felt like it was a little bit more biased. She said many times in here that she has Native American ancestry, but even that section was very lacking as well. I felt like there should have been a lot more credit and a lot more emphasis and history done, which it looks like she said she couldn't find any. I find that hard to believe. But anyway, all in all, even though I know sometimes I can be a little bit harsh on my critiques, but I do think this was a good book. If I had to rank it 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, I'd probably give it about a strong 3.8. I think it's a good book. I do think it is a really good companion to the other book that I did talk about, Working the Roots, which is an excellent book. It has about the same amount of pages, but this one is just delves into African American healing. So perhaps there was other herbalists that she could have talked to that could have also helped her out. I think that would have been helpful. Anyway, the things that I think that these two books can kind of help each other is while this does mention some remedies, it doesn't actually kind of break down the herb by itself, show pictures of it, and kind of tell you, more about the herb. So this could be a good companion in that sense, because once it narrows it down by constitution, you can then go ahead and look at the herbs a little deeper in here. Definitely this helps you with the history portion, whereas I think this is, I like this, the fact that it does talk more about, it does add on to more stories. And so this is more of stories about the Black voices, and this is more stories about, the white voice and her history. So I think that this together would be a really awesome beginner look at Southern folk medicine and African holistic health. So if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.